Modern Diplomacy, 2nd of March 2023, Competition in the South China Sea and the China-Solomon Islands Security Deal. By strengthening and expanding its ties with the island nations in the South Pacific, headed by the Solomon Islands and its capital, Honiara, China prioritizes enhancing its hegemonic influence there. As part of a strategy to encircle the islands in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, this was apparent in the recent development of ties between Beijing and Honiara. The Solomon Islands are currently following a flexible and agile foreign policy, taking advantage of the geopolitical rivalry between Washington and Beijing and using it to their advantage while maximizing their gains. The Line of Nine Sectors, which refers to the lines of demarcation used by China to demonstrate its might is suitable to the majority of the Sea of China, is a term used to describe how dependent China has become on its surrounding regional relationships to persuade all parties to recognize China's right to the disputed islands in the South China Sea. South China, which encompasses the majority of the South China Sea's disputed territories, primarily the Scarborough Shoal, Vereker's Grove, Macclesfield Shelf, the Scarborough Islands, the Spratly Islands, and the Paracel Islands. Therefore, the first Chinese response to American security initiatives in the Indo-Pacific region in the American sense or the Asia-Pacific region in the Chinese concept was to encircle and constrain China, primarily in its spheres of direct influence in the South China Sea, particularly after the United States of America signed the Quadruple Agreement with Australia, India, and Japan and the AUKUS Nuclear Defense and Security Agreement with Australia and Britain. As a result, China's response to the American counterpart was the formation of Chinese security alliances, which coincided with the Chinese People's Liberation Army conducting military drills in that area. China then signed a security agreement with the Solomon Islands Group, known as the Shanghai Declaration, which sparked international concerns that China was about to declare effective control of the South China Sea, particularly considering that Australia is 1,500 kilometers south of the Solomon Islands. The South China Sea dispute results from disagreements between China and a collection of nations that border the sea, including Taiwan, the Philippines, and Japan, all of which are allies of the United States and each of which asserts that it is entitled to its territorial waters. Disagreements regarding the Spratly and Brazilian Islands are still raging. China then published its well-known map, known as the Nine Lines, to claim its fictitious historical claims to it. China confirmed the legitimacy of its policy towards the South China Sea while working to create artificial islands constructed on coral reefs in the area, despite warnings from the United States of America and other neighboring nations. The South China Sea is the most significant body of water for global trade. It is also the most hazardous sea where China and the United States of America might engage in a military conflict. A third of all work through the globe is affected. The United States and other nations in the region, including South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Vietnam, and others, insist that this sea is an international and open shipping lane. At the same time, China consistently asserts that it is part of its land's internal seas. This is similar to how China deals with Taiwan, which insists on independence. Currently, China's construction of 3 artificial islands in the South China Sea raises Taiwan's worries as an ally of the United States of America about whether it should expand the runway of Taiping Island to handle larger warplanes. In March 2022, John Aquilino, the commander of U.S. forces in the Indo-Pacific, confirmed that the Chinese army had already finished militarizing the 3 artificial islands and equipped them with anti-ship and anti-aircraft missile systems, laser and jamming equipment and combat aircraft against Taiwan and Washington's ally regimes, such as the Philippines and Japan. The Shanghai Declaration, a security pact between China and the Solomon Islands, has sparked international concern that Beijing is stepping up efforts to secure what it claims are historical rights over the entirety of the South China Sea. This is especially true given that the Shanghai Declaration was signed just hours after Washington announced it would send representatives to the Solomon Islands to express U.S. concerns about the possibility of establishing a military base there. Although China's school curricula include maps demonstrating that China's boundaries meet the coasts of other countries, China is not content with constructing military bases and artificial islands in its maritime borders in the South China Sea. For decades, Chinese students have been taught that their nation's boundaries reach more than 1,000 miles to the coast of Malaysia. Beijing bases its legal justifications for its claims and defense on the fact that China has been involved in the South China Sea for more than 2,000 years, making its actions there subject to international law, including the regulation of discovery and occupation and the historical name. How does Japan justify its assertion that pre-1945 China was occupied? The South China Sea is an open body of water known as the Maritime Commons of Asia, according to international law. All nations, therefore, own it, the United States of America replies officially. Other countries, including Australia, Britain, and Japan, share this viewpoint. China's demands, which the U.S. State Department claims have no legal justification, pose the most significant contemporary danger to maritime freedom. Due to differences between China and the United States regarding its activities in the South China Sea, the United States of America entered into collective security and defense agreements with its regional allies bordering China in the Indo-Pacific region, in the American sense or Asia-Pacific in the Chinese concept, where the United States of America entered into the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership Agreement, the Quadruple Agreement with Australia, India, and Japan, and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Currently, there is a U.S.-Chinese rivalry over the disputed islands in the South China Sea, which has led to the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy taking part in several military exercises and maneuvers using a variety of ships and dozens of warplanes in combat-oriented naval maneuvers in the South China Sea, which infuriates Washington and causes it to feel threatened and angry. The Chinese aircraft carrier conducted the exercises professionally and by globally acknowledged laws and regulations, as confirmed by Chinese General Tianjun Li, a spokesman for the Southern Operations Command of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. To dissuade China, which is implementing a process of steadily modernizing and enhancing its military and nuclear capabilities in that region, the U.S. military increased its presence in the area in reaction to China's military deployment in the South China Sea. The militarization of the South China Sea and Washington and Beijing's attempts to increase their allies in that region through agreements, alliances, etc., which we observe from the deployment of U.S. warships in the area surrounding the South China Sea, will continue in my opinion, rather than the issue leading to an armed confrontation between Washington and Beijing. And more frequently recently, as a show of American military strength in response to Chinese demands in the South China Sea, preventing a direct exchange of fire between the two sides. As a result, we comprehend that there is a situation similar to the militarization of the South China Sea in light of the Sino-American competition, with a quasi-security agreement between the United States of America and its partners in that region, such as India, Vietnam, and Singapore, to increase the pace of armament. This is based on the growth of China's military power in the South China Sea. Japan also behaves similarly in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. As part of the expanded Sino-American policy of response and reaction in that area and an effort to mobilize each of their allies, China, on the other hand, continues to support its naval forces regularly.